Hello everyone, my name is Prince Ty. Welcome to the exciting merge episode of Prince Ty's Survivor Game Changers Power Rankings. Got a ton to get into, so let's jump right into it. Alas, we have to start off with an RIP. I say this with great mourning and heaviness. As it turns out, Prince Ty was wrong. Haley Ford is gone. She had a weird edit. She had that amazing soundbite about being the snake in the grass, which totally made me buy into her under the radar edit. But alas, that was not to be. She was a shining star for what we saw of the season. That Caleb Tribal Council was amazing. Made sense in hindsight that she was built up as a merge boot. We lost ye too soon. Yeah. Also off my list, although he's still in the game, is Zeke. Zeke was the narrational voice a little bit in the first episode with regards to the Suri and Andrea versus the Sierra and Brad Cold War. But that was basically about it, and I don't think I need to tell you about how terrible the second half of his episode was. Literally no one trusts him. Literally nobody wants to work with him, save for one player who we'll get to, I think, later on. I have a hard time seeing him recover from this. If you want to hear more about everything we thought that Zeke did terribly this past week, watch our podcast from Wednesday. It was a doozy. Billy Garcia, friend of the show, was on. Fantastic stuff. In any case, I do, as per usual, still have two also rans that almost made the list, but not quite based on reservations I have. I have Andrea. We finally saw tonight that Andrea has been integral in terms of the Tavua power structure. Like, we knew that she was working with Zeke, and we knew that she was working with Sarah. As it turns out, she was working with Suri, and that all came together. And we saw that in these two episodes, essentially a double episode, that we had. That being said, she really didn't get much visibility until now. It's kind of hard to figure that she got the visibility for any other reason than she ended up being Zeke's target as opposed to Suri, which just seems foolish, but Zeke was very foolish in this episode. We'll see. I kind of feel like her edit at this point is being angry at Zeke and not a ton more, but we'll find out. We also have Sierra Dawn Thomas, who I said last week I thought might be the merge boot, and if Zeke had been smart, she probably would have been the merge boot instead of almost him. She was a major player for the first time since the Malcolm boot. She had the new sheriff quote. But all of these sound bites, as far as I'm concerned, gave her an almost negative connotation, which while I enjoyed seeing it because it gave her time to shine, she did come across as pushy and dismissive when people were asking why on earth we were doing a vote split between Haley and Michaela, and why, if Haley had the idol, more votes were going on Michaela. She was really pushing for Michaela to go, didn't even get that done. I could still see her biting the dust sooner rather than later. She came across as a villainess in the episode. Like, her laying in the hammock kind of reminded me of Jerry Manthe. Maybe because I like hot women in hammocks. Hard to say. Can you blame me? In any case, with that, we're to our 5 top contenders for the episode. At number 5, I have Reading, Pennsylvania's own, my hometown, Debbie Wanner. Debbie could easily be gone at any point hereafter because she has power, and we all know Debbie kind of gets a little overconfident when she has power. So to that end, she has a very similar edit to Sierra, which kind of makes sense because they were shown to be very tight and very buddy-buddy in this episode. That being said, I cannot talk about power rankings without talking about how great and how beautiful Debbie's episode was for this episode. She wants to be overestimated, so she pretends to be drunk. Everyone seems to buy it, hook, line, and sinker, including Haley, who later got booted in that first half of the episode. You have her making pals with Brad Culpepper again, and Brad Culpepper accepting her back, no questions asked, and that group becoming a solid machine again. She saw right through Zeke's play, decided to make her own play as opposed to Zeke's play, so she's playing for herself, and ultimately she completely bypasses the whole Suri versus Sierra Civil War power struggle and boots Ozzy, while Ozzy doesn't have immunity, which was critical because there wasn't a lot of physical threats out there to beat Ozzy in competitions other than that particular moment with Ty being in a little bit better shape at this point because Ozzy's put on some pounds and those pigtails are pretty heavy. All that being said, she is still Debbie. We cannot forget the extremes that Debbie swings to. So while I thought she had a great episode, I have a hard time raising her above the bottom of my power rankings list for this week. So I have her at number 5. Number 4 is Audrey. Audrey is basically my dark horse candidate now that Haley's gone. She did have a quiet edit again, but she was given enough face time, I would argue, to remind us, I guess you'd say, that she's there. We know from Calrong that her game is suited for many shifts in loyalties, which seems to be where this season might be heading, much like Cambodia with the whole trust clusters or whatever the hell they called it. Ultimately, I feel like she's less of a target in the Suri group than people like Suri, who's an all-time great player, like Michaela, who's a big physical threat, like Andrea, who Zeke tried to target unsuccessfully in this episode, and she's also less of a target than Debbie, who's a huge personality, Sierra, who's literally going guns blazing, and Brad Culpepper, who should be an obvious threat to people based on how strong he is, yet it doesn't seem to be happening, although he's also not winning challenges, so maybe there's something to it. Given all of that, if we keep seeing Audrey, I could see her in a slow build and being a dark horse, and that's enough to keep you on the list, at least for this week. Number 3, in a return to form, her first time on my power rankings, because it's the first time we really got to see her since episode 1, is my personal favorite, Suri Fields. Gotta love Suri. I was nervous when she had so many confessionals early on, because usually a huge visibility jump means you're about to be voted out, but she did survive both tribal councils and came away, I'd argue, with the obvious sentimental favorite edit after this episode. She's taking Michaela, who everyone is kind of down upon and crapping upon, and talks about relating to what it was like for her as a young black woman. Pulls Michaela in, all about inclusiveness. She has the quote about how it's important to bring people in and not push them away, which is brilliant strategy and also makes her a decent, rootable person all in one. And couple that with what happened later on, with her losing the reward, her getting emotional about that. She had a deep emotional moment with players who were arguably her enemies, Brad Culpepper and Sierra, because that's the power duo she was trying to break up this episode. And yet she had that bonding moment with them, which helped her, I'd argue, dramatically when all of a sudden Zeke comes around wanting to push her and Andrea out the door. She's genuine. People want to believe her. And I feel like that will allow her to rebuild her soldiers and do pretty well and make it pretty far. The only reservation I ultimately have with her, as always, is that she's not great at challenges. She could easily end up in 4th place again, just like she has before. The bridesmaid, not the bride. Hopefully not. For the sake of America. We could use a win. But because of all of that, I only have her at number 3. Brad Culpepper is, again, my second contender on my power rankings for this episode. He had a quieter episode, but I feel like that is better for him and protects him because of how negative an episode Sierra potentially had. He got a positive edit for the taking himself out of the reward so the rest of his group could enjoy it. Zeke bitched about it, but Zeke looked so terrible this episode that I almost argue that's better for Brad Culpepper. He could come out of the Sierra boot looking like Jeremy from Cambodia after his strategist friend Steven bit the dust. Overall, he's playing a strong middle-of-the-road game and has a ton of big personalities to potentially block the shield. That being said, as I said in the podcast this week, I am on the Sarah Lucina train. She is my winner pick at this point. Number 1 for this week. It was somewhat of a cool-down episode for her, but we got, again, big positive edit. They could have chosen anyone to talk about defending Zeke, but they chose her. They made a point of telling us that she had options and that she was going to go with the option that was best for her. So when all of a sudden Suri and Andrea are doing what's best for them and getting rid of Zeke not wanting to get rid of Sarah went with the other group and got rid of Ozzy, who everyone knows is a huge threat to win in the end. She's playing her own game, and based upon that, and based upon the craziness that's bound to ensue, I feel that jumping back and forth is a valid strategy, and that she will end up winning this game because of it. Overall, Sarah number 1, Brad number 2, Sari number 3, Audrey number 4, and Debbie Weiner number 5. There's my power rankings. I'll see you all next week. Until then, have good evenings.